Once upon a time, there was a very beautiful girl called Adaego. Many people called her Ego, and she was the most beautiful girl in the village. One day, Adaego went to the bush to pluck some herbs, and she heard a flute in the distance. "Who is it?" she called out, but no one responded, so she began to follow the sound of the flute. Before she could reach the sound, the flute stopped, and this made her so sad, as she was excited to meet whoever was playing the flute. Ego got home that day, and all she could think about was the sound of the flute. She even dreamed that she was dancing to the sound in her dream. When she woke up in the morning, she set out on an adventure to find the flutist. She got to the bush path and found no one there, so she decided to sit down by the bush to see if the person would play the flute again. As she was waiting, she heard the flute. She called out again, but no one answered, so she began to follow the sound of the flute till she got to a small hut by the bush path. She saw a young man playing the flute for his little sister. His name is Ikenna, and he is deaf. Ikenna loves to play the flute for his sister Munachi, even though he can't hear a sound himself. Ikenna and his sister are poor orphans who live alone in the village. They have no friends in the village and always keep to themselves. Ikenna was shocked to see Ego because people hardly visit their hut. Munachi quickly asked Ego, "How can we help you, please?" And Ego told her that she followed the sound of the flute because she wanted to know who played the beautiful sound. Munachi then told Ikenna what Ego said, and Ikenna brought a chair for Ego to sit down. Ikenna began to play the flute again, and Ego didn't know when she started singing at the top of her voice. Ikenna and Ego secretly fell in love with each other in that instant moment, and even though Ikenna could not hear a single sound, he could feel the music in the air, and this made him so happy. Ego was singing when she remembered it was getting late, so she told Munachi to tell her brother that she would be back tomorrow, and she waved at them and ran home. Ego lives with her mother and her little brother Chinedu. Their father died many years ago, and their mother has always been the one looking after them. As the most beautiful girl in the village, many people in the village love and admire Ego. Whenever she goes to the market square to buy food items, people will stop to admire her beauty, especially the young men in the village who all want to marry Ego. Even the most handsome man in the village, Ezenwa, has always had eyes on Ego, and people always talk about what beautiful kids they will make if they got married. Ezenwa has come severally to Ego's house to ask for her hand in marriage, but Ego has still not accepted. Even her uncles have pleaded with her to accept his proposal, but Ego has still not agreed to marry Ezenwa. Ego has always wanted to marry someone that she truly loved, and Ezenwa was not that man. Ego continued to visit Ikenna and his sister, and they drew closer as each day passed. Ikenna and Ego loved themselves so deeply, and they decided to get married. Ikenna and his only uncle Cheta came to visit Ego's people to declare his interest in marrying Ego. Her uncles were so disappointed in Ego's choice of a husband when they found out that Ikenna was not only poor, but deaf. They warned Ikenna to stay away from Ego and stood up and left the scene angrily. Ego was so distraught, and she ran into her room and began to cry. "Mama, what did I do to these people? Let them allow me marry the man I want to marry." Ikenna and his uncle left Ego's house, and though he did not hear all her uncle said, he knew all was not well. When Ikenna got home, he thought to himself, "What did I do to deserve this type of life?" Tears rolled down his eyes, and he grabbed his flute and began to play from his heart. Whilst he was playing, The king of the village passed by and heard the flute sound. He asked 2 of his guards to go fetch whoever was playing the flute. They got to Ikenna's house and carried him to go see the king. Munachi was home crying because she thought her brother was in a lot of trouble. What do the palace guards want with my brother? She asked herself as she continued to cry. Ikenna too was so confused as he didn't know why the king needed to see him. After all, he was deaf and always kept to himself. Why would the king require my presence? He thought to himself. Next thing, he saw everyone rise to welcome the presence of the king. He began to shake. Everywhere was now quiet, and the king asked, "Young man, what is your name?" Then one of the palace guards answered, "My lord, this is Ikenna, late Mazi Osadebe's son. He is deaf and lives alone with his little sister." "I see," said the king. "Send for the interpreter. I want to have a word with this young man," said the king. The palace guard ran swiftly to go call the village interpreter. When he arrived, the king spoke. "Tell the young man that I was passing by his house and heard him blowing his flute. The melodies touch my heart and I am moved to help him. I want him to be by my side always, playing his flute for me. I will give him wealth and any of his heart's desires." When the interpreter told Ikenna this, he fell to his feet and began to cry. Is this how life wants to smile on poor old me? He thought to himself. After just being rejected, the king has accepted me, he thought again. The king went on to say, "Ask the young man to make one wish, and I will grant it with my mantle of authority." And when the interpreter told Ikenna this, he wished that the king granted his request to marry Ego. And when the interpreter told the king this, the king raised up his mantle and said, "Your wish has been granted, my son." Then the king sent for Ego and her family, and they performed the marriage ceremony the next day. Ego and Ikenna lived in the palace happily. They were now rich and the envy of the whole village. The lesson in this story is, no matter your situation, never give up. Always follow your heart. Please, if you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and also hit the bell notification so you'll be notified once I upload a new story. Till next time.